It is great to have you all here today for this webinar brought to you by the Tenney Group, The Art of Responding to an Unsolicited Offer. I think what you're going to find is a ton of great information. We have had the pleasure of doing, I think this will be our seventh webinar with Spencer and the good folks at the Tenney Group. And every one of them has been unique and really interesting. This one is one of I think the questions that they probably get a ton of is, how should I have prepared for the unsolicited offer that I received? So with that, I would like to introduce our guest. Spencer Tenney is the president and CEO of Tenney Group, and Charles Tenney is the founder of Tenney Group. They're both great folks, and I'm going to kind of get out of the way and let them go and talk to you about what do you do when you get that unsolicited offer. So with that, Charles and Spencer, please take it away.
Thank you, Hal. So a buddy calls me up, says, Spencer, I've been meaning to talk to you for a while. First of all, I just married off my youngest daughter. There was the most ridiculously over-the-top wedding ever. I never thought I would do something like that. Chocolate fondue towers on the coast, huge dent in my pocketbook, but it's done, which leads me to my next thing and what I want to talk to you about, because I've got this offer on my business and I really haven't been able to give it any attention, but I think it's pretty good. So I wanted to get your feedback on what to do about it. So he shares with me via email. We walk through it, and immediately I recognize it's like, Johnny, this is pretty good. And I mean, what's your expectation? How are you going to respond to this? He's like, well, I probably will take it if they're still around. And I said, still around? What does that mean? How long has this been sitting here? And he said, well, 6 months. 6 months. I couldn't believe it. I said, Johnny, hang up the phone, go call that buyer right now and see if they'll still honor this deal. So he did. Calls me about the next day or two. And so I said, hey, what happened? He says, well, there's still a deal to be made, but unfortunately, the first deal's off the table. Apparently, while waiting for me, they had another opportunity to buy a deal that would address their major issue. Originally, they had offered me a premium because of how well I could address that issue. But now that the issue is already addressed, they're still interested, but they just don't look at my business the same way. I said, well, what does that mean from an offer standpoint? He says, well, they reduced their offer by 25%, which is, he's about 150 trucks, and it was a total of about $7 million in reduced total consideration. $7 million. So that's why we're here today. This is going to happen so much in the coming months. In the month of July alone, we had more new registered buyers for transportation logistics space than in company history. And so whether you like it or not, whether you want it or not, if you have a good company, this is headed your way. And so there's kind of like, there's some extremes here, like, responding well to an offer doesn't mean that you accept the offer, and it doesn't mean that you ignore it. That's the other thing. So what we're going to try to unpack here today is what we believe is the art of responding to an unsolicited offer. And defining that, it's important. What does that even mean? Well, for us, what that means is that you are stewarding your business in such a way and stewarding this opportunity in a way that you have the maximum opportunity to explore all opportunities to advance your position while protecting confidentiality and protecting valuable time. So we can kind of thread that needle, then we'll know that you are executing what is truly an art form. And we've seen some people do this extraordinarily well. So what if I'm not even interested in selling my business? Like, why would I even entertain anything, a response at all, if I'm not interested in selling? Charles, help us out there. Why would we even engage whatsoever?
Well, there's not hardly anybody that I know that can't learn new things. I'm 75 and I'm still learning new things. So first of all, there's just a lot to be learned. Most people in this business, I've learned over the last 50 years, the exiting of the transportation business is the single largest transaction that almost every single person who owns a transportation business will experience in their lifetime. It holds the majority of their wealth and assets. So they need to be prepared. And so there's just a tremendous amount that can be learned from spending the time with almost anybody who is a qualified buyer. But when someone comes to you, I would look forward to it. I would plan on hoping that someone brings that unsolicited offer to my door because A, I could accept it. B, if I don't accept it, C, I can learn a lot of things about my business today, the market today, my business in the future, the market in the future, my team, and many, many, many other things. It's an opportunity that I would encourage everyone not to pass up, no matter what your thinking is today.
Yeah, and so and the other part of that is that our desire through this time together is that you're going to develop a process that allows you to do this, and in doing so, the response is secondary to you having confidence and total peace of mind about whatever your next move is. Never looking over your shoulder, wondering what if, and that is not good for anybody. So I'm excited to dive in here. So Charles, let's talk about responding effectively to an offer. Why, like, what are the potential outcomes, and what are the benefits of doing this?
Well, some of the things I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago. We have a built-in responsibility, whoever you are that owns transportation business, responsibility to you, yourself, your family, your employees, to your community. All that's part of your legacy. And being a good steward of that and guiding that value and that asset and that legacy or tradition until you exit this business is a responsibility that I think weighs heavy on many, many folks. Your employees, there's lots of opportunities in terms of how it can work well for you. There are employees that will never have the opportunities that might come to them in a future acquisition or a sale of your business. And I think that's stewardship on your part as an owner, taking care of your employees as well. Another thing that's always concerning folks that sell a business is, am I getting the right price? Is this a good price? Will there be something better that I shouldn't even consider this today? But this will open doors about money, and it'll open doors to the future. I would wish that everybody could spend 2 or 3 different occasions when some unsolicited offer comes to the table, because there is so much to be learned by that. I'm kind of embarrassed to do this. I've never done this before, told this story, but I think this is a place where it could be meaningful about how I handled my first unsolicited offer. This is about 40 years ago. My wife and I owned a delivery service in Dallas. And this fellow that owned a regional delivery service just come in the door one day and said, I've done a little homework. I see you around town. Look like a good operation. I'd like to make you an offer. And we went on to discuss that. And he finally did put an offer on the table. We started negotiating about it. And long story short, it's one of the biggest mistakes I've made in my 50-something years in this business. All because I wasn't prepared, and all because I was young, and all because I was inexperienced, and all because I didn't know some of the options that were available to me at that time, 40 years younger than I am now. Just haven't had a lot of exposure to different things. Now, one of the things I learned about going through that process was how badly I handled it and how much I could have handled it differently. I look back at it as a serious mistake, business-wise, in my past. So I did not accept the offer. It was the biggest problem was my ego. I was 40 years younger than I am now, and I wanted X amount of dollars. I did not understand. I wasn't even ready to try to understand. I just wanted X amount of dollars, and I couldn't bridge the gap with my arguments, so we didn't get a deal done. But looking back after that a few months later, and just looking at what I already had planned for my own self with real estate and other business interests I had, it was so foolish for me to pass on that thing just for the amount of the gap in that business. That gap, about $1 million mistake on my part, cost me many millions of dollars over the years about opportunities lost. So I don't want anybody to have that kind of mistake. And the best thing that you can do is go to school. Best school you can go to is to entertain some unsolicited offers.
I like that. Now, another thing that I really like about the upside about what can happen when you respond effectively, one of our industry friends out in Mississippi responded to an offer. It was not a very compelling offer. He asked for our counsel. We encouraged him to stay firm and preserve the relationship. And that's exactly what he did. And then 18 months later, when the buyer had passed a period where a lot of regional people were just trying to give their business away, and he had a greater appreciation for our client's company, he came back and said, all right, that previous offer's off the table. I'm going to pay your asking price, full price cash. Let's do the deal. And so I think that part of his effective response, that's a great example of what can happen. You can hold firm, you can show respect, you can do a lot of things to connect with the buyer, present well, and then set up the opportunity to be executed at a later date. And I think these are the types of things that we want to provide vision for as we move on through this presentation. So let's move on to that next slide as far as what can happen if we do something poorly. So Charles, why don't we just run through these real quick? I think we kind of already hit one of these from a case study standpoint, but let's just run through there just so we round out the expectations here.
Okay. Well, we're all busy these days. You're busy, your team's busy. Buyers, particularly those that need to buy something, are busy. Their time's valuable. So we don't want to waste any time. So preparing to handle the offer so that you're not wasting time or taking away from your primary responsibility as a business owner, very important. Confidentiality, many deals over the years have been killed because confidentiality has been compromised. Now, most people we talk to are very concerned about that because they've heard war stories and terrible outcomes because confidentiality was lost. It's no small thing. So handling it properly is one thing that you do not want to do poorly. That losing the best deal that you're ever going to get, you've got to know if it is the best deal you're ever going to get, or at least ever going to get in the near future in terms of your knowledge and so forth. And just like I was telling you my personal experience about walking away from a deal because of a gap of $1 million, burn a bridge or with an ideal customer is kind of like that. If you're not intelligent enough to talk intelligent with that person, they're not going to have the confidence level that people Spencer was just talking about over in Mississippi, who come back to our seller because of the way that he was handled in that deal and the confidence that the seller had. He came back and paid a premium a year and a half later. So I guess the foolish thing that some folks do is let ego and other things cause them to miss a window. I mean, right now, in the environment that we have, just like Vincent was talking about earlier, all those inquiries, those buyer inquiries, people who want to be on our buy-side list, they're out there, and there are going to be more of them coming before this season is over. I would encourage you, don't miss a window of opportunity.
So how do we make the most of the moment here? And so we're going to walk through some rules of engagement here in the next slide. And again, I want to make sure that we focus on what the definition of success. What we're looking for very specifically, our clients that have really done this well and our industry friends who have done this well over the last 50 years, it's very specific. Number one, they position themselves to consider all options that allow them to advance their position. They do it within a very specific structure that protects confidentiality in time and preserves future opportunities through that experience. So when that happens, that's stewardship perfection. And that's what we want for you all, because like we talked about, the environment that we're in demands it. Record M&A activity, you never know. And I think this is another thing as part of what it looks like. Many times by doing this, it's not about getting a deal done. Sometimes you're able to see your business through the eyes of someone else, and it provides a greater vision than what you have for it right now. And sometimes you see that as a way of, hey, maybe I can go realize that vision with not all the risk on my shoulders alone. And so I think those are the things that we're going to do. If you implement the things that we're going to talk about, that's exactly what you're going to experience. So rules of engagement, the first tier of that is strictly established confidentiality. And this starts well before somebody is expressing interest in buying your business. Many people have an NDA or non-disclosure agreement on standby. They're ready to do that. But the biggest issue is, okay, what do you do next at that point? The reality is, and I'll say this once, but if you're dealing directly with a buyer, it's very difficult. It's a very calculated risk. It happens all the time, but it's a very calculated risk in terms of your ability to control and protect sensitive information at that point. But either way, there's some things that you can do to get out in front of that. And so number one is we want to make sure that you have a non-disclosure agreement that you can share. Number two is that you want to get out in front of this. You want to condition the people within your organization that they are accustomed to pulling reports that have to do with your customer performance on a quarterly basis so that you can produce a one-page teaser that explains generically the highlights of your business, the investment highlights, the historical and projected performance, all the things that a buyer is going to want to look at and ask for. What we're suggesting is the way to artfully respond to an offer is like, you don't need to respond with the raw data. In many cases, that's not even helpful at all. They don't even know what to make with it. If we take the information, put it in a one-page format, that allows you to qualify someone's interest without providing access to sensitive information. It's very key. So once we do that, we can also set up a private data room or a portal for which you can extend access, but also control that information. Those three things, super critical. So if we set, let's just say that we've done those things and we provided that one-page document and the buyer says, hey, I would like to take another step further in exploring this. This is very interesting to me. Perfect. We're in a good place. That allows us to go to the next tier of the rules of engagement, which is communicating expectations. So we want to have a very clear process. Okay, what do we need specifically in addition to what we've already asked to make a proposal that involves money? That's really key right now, because really what we're trying to do is to, in the interest of saving time for everybody, let's just see if we're in the same universe on the money before we go do a deep dive on financials and potentially misuse a lot of people's time and potentially compromise a lot of confidential information. So once we can communicate, this is what is expected, this is what information that you need to make an offer, we will provide that on the condition that you present an indication of interest, which is a non-binding, very informal offer that kind of checks the main terms of a deal to communicate, hey, this is generally what we think about it. This is probably what's going to be available, assuming that everything is going to be satisfied in due diligence. And it's typically in a range. We're not interested in trying to box in the buyer whatsoever. We're trying to give them efficiency as well for both of us. Hey, just give us a ballpark range to make sure that we're in the right place to do a deal. And as long as that we're on board, we can do that. And so we can do that. And Charles is going to give us a little bit of a 2-minute overview on the indication of interest, why it's important, and how we get people to buy into that. So once we've done that, the next part about this, and I think this is where sellers kind of misunderstand their ability to have influence over this process, to say, hey, if we want to go the next step, this is what we need to keep going down this path. And it's very a strict timeline of, hey, now that we've satisfied this non-binding form, we're going to need a more formal letter of intent, which will in more detail outline what a sale is going to look like. We need that by this date. We need to finish due diligence by this date and have specific checkpoints in between that. And then we have an estimated closing date of what this is. The absolute thing that sends pure anxiety into the average business owner that I talk about is like, what if I give all this information, I'm totally exposed and they just drop off the grid? And then this happens all the time. I went down to Ted down the street. I gave him everything. He talked a good talk. And then when it came down to make an offer, he was nowhere to be found. This is how you control this process. If you are making your documents and information accessible through a portal that's confidential, that you control, then you just turn the switch off if you're not getting satisfied. It's very simple. And quite honestly, that rarely happens when a seller or a business owner approaches the rules of engagement this way, because the objective is to not try to be heavy-handed with the buyer. The process in terms of how you're artfully responding to this offer is actually enhancing the efficiency for the buyer. And it's been our experience, it's highly welcomed and appreciated. So let's talk about that, Charles. Let's drop down to this indication of interest. Some people might have experience with this. Tell us about our history of using this document and what benefit has it offered both sellers and buyers as part of communicating and trying to get their interest in alignment.
Well, first of all, this is not something we invented. It's incorporated in our process because it provides an efficient, cost-effective way to get the information we need from one party to the other. So any format that provide you with this information will work. You're welcome to use this form. We're going to send it to you anyway, I believe. If not, just call or ask, we'll give it to you. But you don't want anything more on this form than what a buyer can put together on it. We don't need any details, just the broad stroke, cash, terms, earnout, all those kind of things. And the reason why it's important is because you need those things to evaluate the offer. And you initially, that's all you need to evaluate this offer. We used to deal with people, buyers, especially, since we're saying they work with us, they do, because a lot of buyers would, because it's their process to do things a certain way, they would have you do a ton of things, spend a bunch of money unnecessarily, when we can point out to a buyer, why don't you go this route? Save you money, save our client money, save us all time, and get us on to either working with this deal or move on to the next one. So the value of this deal over the years has become more and more important. One of the things that's important about this thing is if it's not a deal, you get to move on, and you know that it's not a deal sooner, or if it is a deal, you know it's a deal sooner. Buyers appreciate that a lot. So use some form of this and be prepared. There's things to fill out here. If your accountant doesn't provide this information, or someone you trust, and you don't have it readily available, just filling this out for yourself will provide you with a tool that will allow you to control handling a unsolicited offer.
No, I love that. And so, quite honestly, if you did nothing beyond what we've already talked about, you will have advanced your effort and already created a tremendous amount of efficiency. So let's just say that you do that, and now, okay, now I have a real offer in front of me. I did all the right things, and instead of waiting around for 6 months and having a lot of uncomfortable conversations, I've been in this less than a week, and I have a real offer in front of me. So what do I do now? So ideally, you would be evaluating the context of this in terms of real market value that's current. Now, I don't recommend that you try to do this in direct response after you get it. Ideally, you're doing this as an ongoing practice. If you heard any of our content, you know this is really important as far as just being a better steward of your business moving forward. But if you haven't done that, you need to evaluate the offer in a valid and current context so that you make sense of, is this a good offer or is this a lowball offer? Like if it's by itself, it's kind of hard. So number one, get that evaluation. The other part of it is we want to evaluate the offer in a full context. What does it allow you to accomplish, both in terms of price, but also what you experience in your post-transaction life? What is it going to offer you in terms of lifestyle, in terms of stress, your evolving appetite for risk, your goals for community impact, your overall financial security? And we do that in conjunction with what happens at the closing table, but also in conjunction with your investment strategy and wealth deployment strategy post-transaction. And a good example of this, one of our clients recently, we had an offer on the table that was around 50 million in total consideration. And he's just like, Spencer, it's not going to work. And by the time I pay off my debt, by the time I pay taxes, by the time I do all this stuff, and my money's making 1% to 2% in the market, it's not going to work. And so my ears perked up. I said, 1% to 2% in the market. It's like, whoa, William, let's think about this for a second. So we need to look at this offer in terms of holistically, what happens at the closing table plus a deployment strategy. So we brought in a wealth advisor that we trust, a friend, and clearly laid out a deployment strategy that would allow him to earn closer to 5% to 6% on that money. Using, that's their job. That's not my deal, but it was very clear that what he was going to experience was very different from what the assumptions that he was making. So what happened? Well, he was able to, okay, if that's the case, then I have much more confidence about leaning in and engaging and trying to get a deal done here, because now I understand what I'm going to experience. So that's very key in terms of how you respond, getting that in there. Even after you do that, it's still possible that there can be some gaps between what the buyer is making available and where you'd like to be. So what do you do with that? Number one, we got to define it. We can't get there until we've done those first 2 bullet points. We got to define it. And if you're trying to define that without the wealth strategy in conjunction with that, then it's very short-sighted. So once we define the gaps, we have to have an honest assessment of ourselves. Okay, so those are the gaps. What's required to move the needle? What's required of me to do that? And so what we've experienced doing is 50 years, there's basically 4 buckets that we have to address that we can tap into to affect that. So it's time, capital, energy, appetite for risk. Once we assess what we're able to part with, both in terms of time Oh, I need more capital to grow. Maybe it's through an acquisition. Maybe it's through people, talent, technology. Am I willing to part with that? Because knowing what to do is different from actually doing. So once we assess what we're willing to do and what we're willing, or what we're not willing to do, what ends up happening sometimes is owners will say, I know what needs to be done, but in my heart of hearts, I'm not doing any of that. And so by going through that discipline and assessing that, we can have a much more thoughtful response on how we go about doing this. And some people, it's very helpful. Hey, so all I have to do is this, and I can increase the value by $5 million over the next 3 years. Well, that makes sense. I'll do that. Sometimes it doesn't. But as you go through these disciplines in terms of responding to that offer, you're going to have a very effective and thoughtful response that whatever the outcome is, it doesn't matter. This is how you do it. And when that happens, again, you're either going to get a deal or you're going to move on with peace of mind in a very short amount of time with very low energy. And that's what our hope is for everyone here. And there was a case study here recently, I think, that just really did a good job of an industry friend applying these concepts and experiencing what we hope everybody on this call that's going to be a part of responding to an offer actually experiences. So Charles, tell us about our friend out in Florida.
This gentleman had a very good business. He was a smart person. He was a clever person. And he had a wife who was a financial person who was his advisor. And together they made a pretty serious team. Anyway, he had dealt with a couple of offers in the last several months when he came to us. And he just wasn't quite sure that the two offers that he had were clear enough or told the whole story of what was a fair price for him and his wife to take for their business. We took on the client, reviewed what he had what he'd gotten from these two unsolicited buyers, and went out into the market. And in about 8 weeks, after approaching 20 targeted folks we thought would have an interest in his business, trying to be careful about maintaining confidentiality and so forth, 8 buyers responded. 8 buyers responded with an LOI and offers. So he had the 2 offers that he got himself and the 8 offers that we got for him. So he had a total of 10 offers. And the thing that he learned is one of the offers was a 30% increase over the offers that he had gotten from the unsolicited buyers. You know, buyers, their deal is not to go out here and pay you as much as they can. Their deal is to go out here and pay you as little as they can if it's fair to the market. So he did that, and he went away from that a deal very confident that he trusted not just 2 people, but professional people. 8 different professional buyers come to him and convinced him that this was a fair deal, terms were fair, and him and his wife could sell their business and go away from it and be not looking back over their shoulder, asking them things that have to do with making them stay awake at night. Did I do the right thing? Did I get enough? Was it the right terms? He was one of the most complete sellers that I can remember in a long time. It wasn't very long that he was down in South America racing cars. He left that thing behind with a couple of his family members, and he was out of there comfortably, knowing that what he had done in terms of getting these different offers made life right for him.
You know, what I really like about that story that Charles is sharing is that it really captures what is so critical. A large part of where the efficiency takes place is where someone makes a great offer. And my experience has been dealing with buyers, especially experienced buyers. They're not necessarily interested in trying to lowball anybody. They're not going to overpay. They're not really trying to lowball. And what can happen is you can have a very fair offer extended to a business owner who, for the most part, is inexperienced, and there's no reason for them to be experienced. For most, it's the first time they've ever done this. And so they might spend months in due diligence, and they get to this point, and then it gets to the point of actually exchanging control and exchanging money. And that's when we have a panic moment, and where you often see self-sabotage because there's only been one offer on the table. And it's not because they're trying to drum up a higher sales price. It's human nature. If there's any doubt that you might be leaving money on the table, it's human nature to self-sabotage and not trust it and move on. And so the discipline of ensuring that you have multiple looks is part of protecting the time that you put into the process, because it's getting deals done is hard. We've been doing this a long time and we're pretty good at it, but it's hard. And so what we found is for just to help us bring value to business owners, we understand that from a psychology standpoint, they need to see multiple things so that they can trust the market. And without it, it's just very difficult to get to the finish line. So that's just a great case study right there. And I appreciate that. Let's move on to that next slide. Convenience equals discounted value. Now, I previewed this a moment ago, and coming into Q3, Q4, with the amount of activity that's taken place, irrespective of what's happening in the market, it's been our experience as an industry specialized M&A firm, sometimes in some of the roughest markets is where we see some high amount of strategic deals take place. And so even more so now, just in terms of how critical it is to increase capabilities across the supply chain. So this is happening. And so it's likely that engaging into these discussions is going to be highly, highly inconvenient for you. Redlining, you're trying to figure out drivers, you're trying to figure out all these things, and it just seems impossible. It's not. It's not if you follow the rules of engagements that we talked about. You go back to my friend Johnny, in terms of, did he have legitimate reasons to postpone this? He had a Cadillac wedding for his daughter. He had a DOT audit that I'm sure was giving him fits. However, if he had put in place a process and executed exactly what we're talking about, he likely could have locked down those terms and scheduled getting the deal closed around all the other things that were going on in his life, had assistance from third parties, both and people within his firm to get that deal done. But convenience quite literally cost him $7 million in that situation. And I think that that's what we're talking about. That's why the art of responding to an unsolicited offer is so key. And it doesn't matter what the outcome is. The response is what matters. So Charles, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd say this about my generation. And frankly, I'm there. I was one. It took me almost 70 years old before I decided to sell a business. And I had some reasons for doing it. But most folks never give a thought about convenience or inconvenience. It's more about not thinking about it at all. But when they do think about it, it's an inconvenience. Like we were talking about earlier, we're all going to get out of this business someday. And I think it's the smart person, man or woman, partners, investors or whatever, that look at optimizing their exit. And, so many of us are tied up that the business is us, or we are the business, when that has no place in terms of your responsibilities to your family, your health, your culture, your community, and what you owe to yourself and others overall. I think younger folks have an advantage these days. We had a couple of partners come to us not too long ago who had built a business. They started, both of them were working for another man. Each of them worked for different businesses, but they started this business with the American Dream. They wanted to own their own business. And 5 years into it, just a year and a half ago or so, they came to us, had some people contact them and got them interested in considering it. And their business was already significant, and it was capable of supporting both of them as good or better than they were being supported by their day jobs. But they looked at a couple offers, actually it's more than a couple of offers that came to them, and they made a decision that I think is much more difficult for a person that's 65, 75 years of age. This younger generation looked at it as stewardship. And they also looked at it as opportunities that they might consider. So to be able to work 5 years and put together $12, $15 million, more than they ever make from a job, more than they ever make continuing to doing what they're doing, someone was willing to give them that. I think it was that youngness and that confidence that they knew what was going on. They knew that they understood what the market was going to do. They had some interest that they were waiting to pursue as well. Real estate was one of them. But they went ahead and didn't let convenience make the decision for them. And in their case, it was a very, very wise.
I think that's great stuff. So let's kind of put a bow on this thing here from a conclusion standpoint. If nothing else, I want everyone to walk out of here with just kind of a new mindset of how they view this, how they view responding to an unsolicited offer. I'll tell you what it's not. It's not getting you on a path, an irreversible path to selling the business. That's the exact opposite of what we're talking about.
Right.
It is a function of stewardship that allows you to lead better for the people that are under your leadership, and advance the opportunities for both the business and the ownership, the employees, and the community. So I think, and the outcomes are totally irrelevant. It's just the manner in which you respond and you steward the opportunity. That's the issue. And I think if you do this, you're going to really grow as a leader moving forward. So in conclusion, be expectant. If you've got a great business, you should expect offers. You should expect to be in this position, and you should expect to execute and present in a highly effective way using this framework. So I think that's part of the deal. Be first. This is very strategic. I mean, think about it. We had one of our clients here just recently. The buyer presented 4 unsolicited offers to 4 different sellers. And it was only because of how fast and ready our client was that they were able to respond using the one-page teaser to do all the things that we had talked about, that they shut down conversations with the other 3 immediately, because like, hey, from an execution risk standpoint, this seems like a much better path and a partner to try to get a deal done with. It's like the great M&A philosopher said, which is Ricky Bobby said, if you ain't first, you're last. It's the way it works. So that's my encouragement to you. Just be first, make sure that you're getting at the front of the line so that you have leverage as you continue to explore the opportunity. This be in control. Don't underestimate the influence as a seller dealing with, in some cases, billion-dollar buyers. You have tremendous influence on how this process should function. So when we talk about using the one-page teasers, using the indication of interest format within that 5-day kind of time frame to try to figure something out, and I'll put a little disclaimer, depending on the size, the complexity of the business, obviously we can move that lever a little bit, but the principle's the same: speed. Let's be efficient for everybody, and then having a data room that allows you to control who and when someone gets access to your sensitive information, and then setting up those timelines and taking leadership over that. Guys, that's what changes the whole experience, so that you maximize your learning, maximize opportunities, and protect valuable time. Hey, it's been a true privilege to present to you. We hope you get some nuggets out of this. If you want to continue your education along this topic, we encourage you to lean in. Right now, you can download this using your phone off your screen if you just want to do that white paper. I think that'll be helpful to you. And obviously, we're here if you have any other questions. But I do think that we're going to have some Q&A, and we'll be happy to stick around for a little bit for those that want to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Spencer and Charles. That was great. Another, boy, it's sort of a masterclass in business in under an hour. And I just want to thank you for breaking that down and giving really kind of invaluable business advice to folks. And I think one of the takeaways that I got from what you were saying, for anybody, whether you're thinking about selling or you're not thinking about selling, get your house in order, do a little bit of simple preparation, and set yourself up for great success. We definitely have some questions, so let's go ahead and jump in there. And here's an interesting one, and I kind of like this perspective. Is they've kind of flipped it around, but they said, from your experience, can you apply some of these same principles to the business development? So can you kind of go through this process and then apply that to your own business development, through whether that's through organic growth or growth through acquisition, which I know is another sort of sweet spot for you guys.
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think Charles, through the years, I know of probably 3 different buyers that Charles has done 10 plus deals with. And it's because they've adopted some of the things that may have been, not original, but certainly fresh for them at the time, which is to say, hey, just you tell us what you want to do, and then put these things into practice in terms of extending and starting with the indication of interest. Resist the temptation to go ask for everything that's highly sensitive. You're probably going to get a lot more engagement if you resist that temptation. Try to identify the thing that the seller cares about the most, which are we aligned on the money? And that's just going to multiply quality at that. So for those that are on the corporate development side and they're trying to do deals and to procure opportunities, the inverse of what we're describing, we believe, is highly valuable to those teams that are trying to, like I said, get quality opportunities and multiply those quality at bats.
So
Hal, I would add,
please, Charles. Yeah,
there are many folks out here in charge of business development, owners of the business and so forth, that don't give themselves enough credit on what they're capable of doing in terms of acquiring themselves, regardless of what size they are. Just like the experience that we're talking about trying to provide to sellers to entertain a buying deal, the prospective business development teams or businesses who want to grow, most of them don't give themselves enough credit for what they're capable of doing. They need to go get some confidence by going through a process of time. But over the years, it's been pretty discouraging how many people count themselves out before they ever get in the ring.
That's some really good perspective from your years of experiences. Kind of not having faith, not trusting that you can pull it off. So here's an interesting question. What if you get an offer from somebody that you don't feel like you want to do business with for whatever reason? How do you respond to that?
It's a really good question. And so I think it not to be evasive, it depends. So I think that if you're in a mode where this is not even on your radar, then maybe you just politely say, hey, this is not a good time. I'm flattered. Number one, I'm really big about always show gratitude. Nobody had to say a word, but just say thank you. Like, thank you. I really appreciate taking the time to express this. Perhaps it's not the best time to do that. And this is if you really have a history of like distrust or whatever the deal is. You can still show gratitude, be gracious, and say, hey, let's just keep the door open in case anything changes. Now's not really a good time. If you are in a mode where you are considering an exit, number one, I would ask you to humble yourselves. You might be bringing something to the table that's affected that relationship. And two, keep an open mind because they may be able to do certain things with your business that nobody else can. They may be able to make some outcomes available that nobody else can. And at the very least, if we're in an environment where we're trying to consider, every offer is valuable. You can learn something from it. You may see something in that offer that you'd like to see in a different offer from someone that you do want to align yourself with. So depending on where you're at in those situations, we want to try to steward that opportunity, that relationship as best as we can. But at the end of the day, never say never, always keep the door open.
I think that you mentioned that in one of your stories is that importance of that response. I think right out of the gate, it was, be timely. You may not have to have a full answer right out of the gate, but certainly be responsive to say, yes, I've got a pulse. Thank you for reaching out and let me get back to you in some period of time. Don't make a $7 million mistake. Oh my. So here's an interesting one too. And this is, and I know that you've talked about this a little bit in previous sessions that we've done, but what happens if you've got two partners and one of them is sort of keen on exploring a sale, but the other one just isn't there yet, or it hasn't gotten their head around it? How do you deal with a situation like that?
Charles, you want to take first stab at that?
Well, give an example, a case study. We had a pretty sizable transportation business in the Boston area a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, family-owned business, a divorce involved in one of the four brothers situation. One of the brothers and the ex-sister-in-law couldn't get together on selling their business. They were of an age, they were all running to get out. The ex-wife and one of the family members were younger. They just didn't want to do it. I actually got on a plane, went up to Boston, spent some time with those people, listening very quietly, got them separately, then I got them together to talk about why. Why are they thinking this way? So sometimes the family can't get it done themselves. So sometimes somebody outside the family that's respected, not talking about me, but some family friend, or just anybody that's not the family, bring them in and see if they can help them. And if they can't help them come to a single conclusion, they can make the family better just by going through the process. Make the family understand one another better by going through that process. You can't, when someone is so far out, as those people were in Boston I'm telling you about, they would have never gotten together without some third-party intervention. Families are tough, as we all know.
That makes a lot of sense. Here's a really good one. I think how do you know a buyer's serious versus somebody who's just kind of kicking the tires, kind of, maybe they just are feeling around trying to get some business intelligence without, it being maybe, I don't want to say shady, but how can you tell when somebody's serious?
No, it's a really thoughtful question. And what I would say is this: when we're doing this internally for our active clients, we go through a sequencing in terms of how do we rank the viability of getting a deal done with a particular buyer. And there's a couple of questions that we ask. Number one, is there evidence of them actually doing deals? Have we done it? And is there evidence for that?
Right.
And in general, if there's any public knowledge about that, we want to know about it. For our sake, we want to know, has Tenney Group done a deal with them? Because that kind of influences what we know. We want to leverage what information that we know. And then we want to talk about in terms of capabilities. And you think about it from this way: if someone wants to buy your business and maybe they're half the size of you, that's a risk. And from an execution standpoint, it's very likely that they're going to have a hard time executing. Whereas if you're a $50 million gross revenue company and the company that is interested in you is more like $250 million, well, that's pretty very realistic. That's a pretty seamless integration in terms of what they're doing. So I think when you look at deal experience, and validation from if we've done business with them and we know it firsthand, and then we know from a size standpoint that they can go satisfy all the third-party consents, be it customers, be it from real estate or vendors or whatever, or your equipment people. Those are going to be important things if we're going to be relying on third-party consent. So if you can kind of go through that progression, check those boxes, and if you have some trusted advisors, really think that insurance solution folks, do you know anything about these people that you don't think that's above board? That would be the last thing that I would ask about. If you can satisfy those things, then I think it's more than sufficient to go explore using that framework that we've outlined for you.
Spencer, I'll add to that. When it's looking the way that you just described, where someone we don't know that person has capability or can go the distance to do a deal, I just remind people, here's the first opportunity in most of our lives where we get a chance to be the banker. When the banker comes to you, or you go to the banker and ask for proof that you can pay back a loan, or proof that you can buy a house and pay it over the next 30 years, or buy out a business and so forth, they ask for anything they want. So talking about giving you confidence, you are the banker. You have every right to inquire of anybody what financial condition, financials that they can provide, personal financials and so forth. And believe me, if they're not genuine, that'll give you the answer very quickly. And a few things like that will weed out the shaft from the good stuff in a hurry.
And I think that is, from a sequencing standpoint, I think where you see a couple of iterations of that. Where we see that getting really sensitive is when if the deal contains some element of seller financing, and that's where you see later in the process where it becomes very appropriate to check the credit references of other sellers that they've done deals with. That's always on the table.
That's some good advice there. And I think we've got time for probably one more before we wrap up and touch on a couple other things. But here's a question. I'm worried about getting key leaders involved too early and causing problems for my business. When would you suggest that somebody loop in other people into the process?
I think the best practice, and we reiterate this in a variety of different presentations that we do. I think the preferred thing to do is to normalize what happens as part of what a buyer needs. So if your leadership team is on a quarterly basis, as I talked about early on, producing the one pager in there, that's already kind of a part of a standard procedure that, hey, this is what we do because, the job of the business is to increase the value of the business for the stakeholders. So if nothing else, just for the owner to see the evidence of what's happening here. If the leadership's being charged to do that, then there's no disruption when someone comes in and does that. So I think that by the ownership leading and getting that in place, they actually insulate their business in themselves from that being an issue. So that I think that's the first thing that you can do. And depending on, where your business is in terms of size, maturity, and just the quality of your leadership team. I mean, some people will look at that a little bit differently, but I think that's the best situation where you're able to go facilitate and experience what we just described without disrupting, and they're still adding all the value and answering all the questions. When it gets down and gets pretty serious, I think it is customary that, once we got past the indication of interest and we start getting into a very detailed LOI, it's very customary to kind of, at that point, we know that we're in the ballpark on the money. So it's pretty customary that they're going to want to know and hear from the management team, especially because that's part of their strategy. They want to know. It could definitely affect how they value the final value that they place on the business in an offer. So I think once we've got that range in there, we've satisfied that we're in the universe. At some point, we're going to have that management meeting, and that could be an appropriate time. Some owners just can't stand that they want to loop them in really early. And my challenge would be to resist that until there's something actually to talk about. But that, again, I get it why they would do that.
Yeah, that makes a load of sense. And I do really like that notion of doing that, regular checkup, really, like, performing that activity of generating that one sheet that you're talking about, because that's all, critical, important information for your business anyway. It's a bit of a dashboard, right? So going through that process is probably really beneficial for you, just out of sheer good business practice.
And what we found is that it is a very direct way to affect your leadership team's ability to enhance the value of the business, because if they're responsible for that, they can't not affect it. So it serves two purposes.
Yeah. And I think that this is a good segue to wrap up and draw folks' attention to the wealth of information that y'all have already provided through the previous webinars that we've done. We've done a series that are available on demand that folks can go to if they just go to intermodal.org and the education tab, and then education on demand. I'm excited about the wrap up for this year's series that we've done, which is going to coming up in October on the 19th, 9 differentiators that separate acquisitions winners from losers. So it really kind of brings everything together that we talked about over the course of this year and last year, really, and kind of says, okay, what are the things that are really going to put you at the top of the list. I'm also excited to say that Spencer is going to join us at Intermodal Expo in September. Don't forget to register. Head on over to intermodal.org and register. But Spencer's going to be moderating a session called Dollars and Cents, Understanding Transportation Capital. And we're pulling together some top experts from the field that I think is really going to make folks' day. So don't miss that. If you're going to be at Expo, you'll see Charles because the hat gives him away. I almost guarantee he's going to be the only fellow wearing a hat at Expo. But with that, I want to thank Spencer and Charles for joining us today. Thank you to the Tenney Group for sponsoring this and the series and making this all possible. So thanks to everybody for their time. And we look forward to having y'all back soon at IANA, the connecting force behind intermodal freight.